Good morning. Welcome to today's UKAA webinar. Another fascinating topic today, working with Spike Global on building and maintaining community post-Covid-19, a theme that's come up repeatedly in our discussions over the last 10 weeks, and the importance of community. As I say, it's hosted by Spike Global, one of UK members, great tech company, really interesting tech company. Objective of increasing efficiency and encouraging engagement, and I think that's what we're going to try and do today. We're joined by a panel of pioneers. I think everyone of the panel is a pioneer in their own right in the build-to-rent sector or some aspect of it. But I'll let our host, Kirsty Lane from Spike Global, introduce them or introduce the panelists, and they'll talk about themselves. You have got down the bottom, as always on our webinars, a chat function and a Q&A function. We've got a series of questions which Kirsty's going to ask the participants, the panelists. But if you've got your own questions, then put them through on the Q&A and we'll try and pick them up as they come along. If there's something on the chat you want us to pick up, then we'll pick that up as well. And I can actually see we've got one chat already from Rahul Patel. So Rahul, could you put your question through on the Q&A and we'll pick it up later on. At that point, just to let you know, this is being recorded and will be available on the UK website in due course. And with that, I will hand over to Kirsty from Spike Global.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, I think Dave has introduced the subject perfectly. The hot topic of community we'll be discussing today. I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. If we start with you, Harry, you can do a little introduction and then we'll move on from that.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Harry Downs. I'm Managing Director of Fizzy Living. Fizzy was started 8 years ago now, and we now have just under 700 flats under management, 300 under construction. We've got about 1,400 tenants at the moment, and we are set to grow, I would hope, to about 5,000 units over the next 3 to 4 years.
Fantastic. And Jeremy, did you want to go next?
I will. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeremy Heath-Smith. I'm the founder and CEO of Spike Global. I started the business 8 years ago. My background is from video games business, and I've used an awful lot of that has come through into the whole user experience within the sort of the prop tech, which I'm sure we'll discuss as this webinar goes on.
And Hannah, did you want to go next?
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Hannah Marsh. I'm one of the co-founders of HOMEVIEWS. HOMEVIEWS is the review site for residential developments. We've often been dubbed the TripAdvisor of property, which sort of sums things up quite cleanly. We launched in February of last year, and since then we've now got almost 10,000 resident reviews across 900 developments in the UK. So we invite owners, tenants, housing association tenants, local authority tenants to write reviews about what it's like to live in new build developments, to rate their experience and to share their insights. So that's a little bit about HOMEVIEWS.
Fab. And last but in no means least, James.
What's last? Terrible. So my name is James Dearsley. I'm the co-founder of Unisu. Unisu is a global platform that connects the buyers and the sellers of property technology. Normally that's in the terms of a procurement tool, where we realize a lot of the property industry around the world is trying to battle with finding technology solutions for their business, especially in light of the post-COVID situation. And that's what we do. We have a matching algorithm that matches your problems with over 8,000 solutions from prop tech companies all around the world.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for those introductions there. So yeah, let's get it kicked off. So we all know that community, I'm sure we've all sat on webinars talking about how important community is at the moment. And we kind of want to dig a bit more into what that really means to residents and how we can continue to support that and kind of moving beyond the buzzword and thinking about what that really means. So we're going to kick off with Hannah is going to talk us through some reviews they've seen on the platform and give us a bit more insight into that.
Thank you. I'm just going to share screen and share a few things with everyone. So hopefully everyone can see my slides now, all up on screen. Thank you. So HOMEVIEWS has been continuing to receive resident reviews since the start of lockdown. And it's interesting for us to start to compare the experience of those residents' reviews and ratings that they've been giving and comparing that to what we've seen from last year as a benchmark. So I thought I'd just share a few review quotes and insights from what we've seen. So since the 17th of March, reviews and ratings have actually been broadly consistent with the 2 months previous and also with 2019. Management are being described as thoughtful, caring, kind. So we've actually seen some really lovely sentiment coming through in reviews. And some of the sort of stats that we've shared continue to be there as time goes on. So 35% of reviewers are actually talking about community and neighbours. And when we looked at the data in 2019 in our Build to Rent report, we saw that it was actually 12%, so a big increase. We've also seen a big increase in references to cleaning and cleanliness and the importance and visibility of this. So 28% of reviews have references to cleaning and cleanliness, which was a big increase from anything we'd seen before. And in the first month, 34% of reviews, and this is across owners, private tenants, housing association tenants, build to rent tenants, they've been talking about security and a feeling of safety. And that compares to 17% in 2019. And looking at our latest and most recent data, this has now increased to 40%. So it continues to be a really strong theme. And this is very often sort of linked to management. So a positive feeling of I feel safe, I'm feeling looked after, I feel secure. We're seeing that coming through in a lot of reviews. So when we look at build to rent in particular, build to rent tenants have rated their experience higher than owners and non-build to rent tenants on all of our criteria. And we ask a lot of different separate questions around all the facilities and amenities, as well as value, location and customer service. And build to rent continues to be a very high performing area. Everyone likes a bit of data, so just actually put up a slide which compares the stats for build to rent. So this is actually looking at the average ratings that we've seen during lockdown and comparing that to 2019. So the star rating we've seen for build to rent has continued to remain very high, 4.28 out of 5 for a development review, and that's compared to 2.34 in 2019. So we have seen some dips on facilities and management, but actually the sentiment of what people are talking about is still actually very high, very positive. I do think it's quite interesting. We've also seen a real increase in location. And actually we've seen a lot of reviews where people have been talking about a kind of almost appreciation for their location in a way that they hadn't before. I think with our daily walks being allowed out in your local area, there's almost a new appreciation for what's immediately on your doorstep. So lots of interesting comparisons, but I think the message is incredibly positive in terms of the reviews that have been coming through overall. In terms of COVID-19, only 6% of all reviews have actually referenced COVID, and it's mainly been positive. It's a nice example here from one of Harry's buildings, so from Fizzy Lewisham, and actually talking about, this is right at the start of lockdown, and talking about the appreciation for the kind of consistent attention from the management team and the cleanliness. And this all goes to actually about management who are on site, being attentive, making residents feel safe and appreciating that. And also a nice reference here in terms of actually those amenities that are still open and how actually that's very much appreciated in a time like now. I've put some different review examples because I know people always like reading, but please, there's thousands and thousands of reviews on HOMEVIEWS, so please do spend time reading them. But most reviews don't actually mention a lack of access or reduced on-site management, and they don't actually mention much of a reduction in terms of facilities. People often still talk very positively about the fact that they have an amazing gym and a pool, or they have events, and they're not talking about reduced access right now. They're actually just still very delighted with what they have, And we've only had a few reviews which have been at all negative. In the main, it's more talking about the kind of the concierge, the development that they've signed up to in the first place, and why they enjoy their experience there. In terms of community, it is so often connected to the management team when we see references to community. And I thought it was sort of interesting for us to look at when community is mentioned, what this is down to. And in our 2020 Build to Rent report, we actually looked into the references of community in Build to Rent. And of those mentions, 24% of those references of community were talking about events as the main reason. I think a lot of Build to Rent developments have continued to do a lot of digital events during this time. 22% reference pets as a big factor in building community. So having a pet-friendly development, enabling them to socialise and meet other residents. And 16% talked about management as key in fostering community. And so much of that is actually about a kind of friendly face at the front desks who sort of supporting them and introduce them to other residents. And when we actually looked at the stats and the data and what's the correlation in terms of ratings and scores, the third highest correlation to a higher star rating was those buildings that offered events. The second highest was pet friendly, and the first highest in terms of the highest performing developments were those that were offering a concierge or having somebody who was front of house there to sort of support residents. So we can consistently see this sort of management theme enabling community as a strong factor. And I thought that was nice actually just to share with Harry here. We had a recent resident that moved into Fizzy Canning Town during lockdown who wasn't able to go and do a face-to-face viewing and use virtual tours, and then actually read all the reviews on HOMEVIEWS, and that really kind of confirmed their decision. And speaking to Marsha, who's I think we moved in last week, she actually said that there were two main reasons that she wanted to move into Fizzy, and that was actually from reading all the reviews and the sort of the spirit of community, understanding what it's actually like to be in that building, to kind of those first-hand accounts of what it means to be part of Fizzy Living. And also the second reason for Marsha was choosing Fizzy Canning Town was about the reputation of the landlord, and knowing they could trust and feel confident in where they're living. So for us, community continues to remain a sort of very strong theme that we saw last year in Build to Rent, and it's just even higher during this period in terms of importance. And how that is linked so strongly to management. So that's just a little bit of a hopefully some insights from HOMEVIEWS.
Fantastic, thank you for that, Hannah. Yeah, it's very interesting that only 6% mentioned COVID, but the community side had gone up. So the positives of obviously what people have been producing have been outweighing the negatives of the situation, which I think is, yeah, it's very interesting. And I think we touched on it slightly with some good work that Fizzy have been doing in the community area. Yeah, I'll hand over to Harry to talk through some initiatives that Fizzy have been putting together and kind of how they've been taken up, really, because it's all very well community. If we're offering community, are they taking up the new way we're doing it, etc. And I think Fizzy have done really well in this area. So yeah, if you can share some of those insights, Harry, that would be wonderful.
Thank you, Kirsty. I'd just like to start by saying no one at Fizzy, including me, had any say in Hannah's choice of slides before we get any further into this. Yeah, as far as engaging with the community, and have we seen increased engagement? I think very strongly what's important about a community is to understand that a community is a whole bunch of people who have similar things in mind, which is what makes them a community. And if you get, I mean, for example, you know, a 65-year-old and a 35-year-old, me and my son, we have very different things that we're interested in, things that matter to us. And to have a community that works for everybody is very difficult. We've always been at Fizzy targeting the young professional. Originally, we were going for 30-year-olds earning 30 grand a year and spending 30% of it on rent. We started 8 years ago. So 8 years later, our average tenant is 31, moved up 1 year. So it's the same sort of people. But what that means is we really understand what they're after. And it means that the creation of a community is that much easier. What has changed during the 8 years is technology, and I've been advised by my team that in March, for example, we had 38,000 hits on our app. Well, 8 years ago, that would have been 38,000 attempted phone calls to a team of about 4 people, which would have meant we couldn't do a thing. But what it's meant is with our app, which runs our community, we can deal with all of those calls because there are bits of the app which require sort of face-to-face one-on-one. For example, in the last few weeks, we've brought out something that has been called Boom Hours. All of our managers are called Bob the building manager, and this is Bob on Zoom. And any tenant can call in for a boom hour during boom hour and have a one-on-one with the Bob. But it goes on from that. There are loads of social clubs. The app's designed in such a way that tenants can start their own clubs, and there are loads of them, and they're very, very popular. But we tend to host things. We tend to do Fizzy Fridays, which particularly in the COVID time consist of quizzes and that sort of thing, advice for how to deal with working from home, how to get medicine, how to, all of these sorts of things that we can help with are all there and easy now. And because I think we've got a bunch of people who are all fairly like-minded, they're not all 31. It goes, I think our youngest tenant's about 21, and the oldest is in his 80s. So it is a big range, but on the whole, they react very positively to what we are offering them as a community. And certainly the reviews that we read on HOMEVIEWS confirm that.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, it's an interesting pivoting, obviously, from face-to-face events that I think were a huge part into kind of digital events. So thank you for sharing that. Jeremy, you at Spike, obviously you work with a lot of different operators, developers, etc. Have you also seen this rise in engagement on the community side of things? And have you seen like similar initiatives and similar kind of reliance on the app, as Harry mentioned as well?
Sure, absolutely. So I think it's really important to understand the whole purpose of this webinar is to talk about life after normality, shall we say. How do we get back to some level of normality? And this is not a pitch to sell our software. This is actually what we have found across all our clients, and we've combined that data to give us some unbelievably fascinating facts. And I think the key fact is that everybody wants to communicate. We've just lost how to communicate. So unless it's via your smartphone, knocking on somebody's door has been something that your parents did. Well, that, of course, in lockdown situation has created the need that we all use the smartphone. And I think that what our software has enabled and has shown to work is how the communities have come together. And some amazing examples. I mean, just if I tell you that across the board, the upsurge in our forums and communities and clubs has been about 250%. So the increase is phenomenal in pure usage. And as Harry said, 35,000 requests into their app is a huge amount of requests. And all for very obvious reasons, everybody's locked down. But within all of those, there's some really inspiring things that have come along. We have a lady in one of our schemes who bakes a cake every day, virtually every day. She takes it downstairs, leaves it in the foyer, and posts out on the forum that she's baked a coffee cake. And incredible. We have forums set up offering to do shopping for people who may be self-isolating. We have posts coming that telling you how busy the shops are, if there's any queues. We have so the help has been remarkable. And coming out of this terrible time, there's no question in my mind this has brought people much closer together. And the purpose of this is how do we maintain that and we move that forward. I think from a operator's perspective, this has to highlight the importance of the community and how do they communicate with the community, whether it's through our software or somebody else's software or emails or however they want to do it. The key is that they have to do it. There has to be a communication with their residents, because it's very obvious that the residents want this direct communication. We can go show you so many facts and figures to prove that point. And then secondly, from us and with the upsurge in, have we been busy? Yes, which is great. Has there been a lot of inquiries from new clients? Yes, which is great. We're all getting used to doing this, which is interesting. For us moving forward, it's a very busy time. But for us as a company, it's not. We also help as a community. We have a team of people that will help your community and make suggestions and help, because the apps are great, but they're only as good as the information that's put on them. So if you don't invest into the time in the app, it won't work. It will go onto your phone. People might use it to get their deliveries or report that their shower's broken, but the engagement has been much more than that. So we put together things. Would you believe? I was just looking at the June activity in June. It's World Gin Day on the 13th of June, so hurrah! We can all good excuse to have a gin and tonic. National Fish and Chip Day, probably a little bit more important. It's Loneliness Aware Week on June the 15th. So we're highlighting this to our clients. We're telling them what's happening in the big world, and then how can we help that? We had clients that have done associations with local businesses, so they've got the local Italian or pizzeria or something to tie in with the software, tie in with their building, which again, it extends the community to even further. So long-winded answer to your question, yes, all very positive. And for us, it just substantiates everything that we set out to do.
Thank you for sharing those. And James, from a slightly different side of the industry, obviously, Unisu, you see developers, operators, etc., come onto your platform searching for solutions to their problems, I suppose. Have you seen a rise in people looking for community solutions? What have you seen it become a buzzword? Like what have you seen, and how do you think it's kind of going to go?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting trend, and partly because before COVID kicked off, there was a significant demand from the commercial space to have what they call the tenant experience app, and it was hugely hyped. Every commercial building wanted a commercial tenant experience app, and it was driven from the US, and it was sort of coming over this way, and we had loads of inquiries from commercial buildings wanting that. They wanted to, increase the engagement with the people in the buildings and all this sort of stuff. Now, obviously, that's just died completely overnight. And there's certainly a lot of chatter around the sort of the converse of the residential tenant experience apps. But in terms of developers coming on to us as a platform and entering in particular procurement projects, saying, look, we want to survey the market, because one of the biggest, I think, errors that people make is thinking that if we are a UK-based developer, a UK-based solution will solve our problem. And that's not the case. The solutions to the problems that these people face are global. PropTech is a global solution to a local problem. But to sort of answer far more succinctly to your question, no, there has not been a short-term increase in interest around this area. And I think that's partly just because there is this short-term panic that has happened in the marketplace. I think there is a short-term review by business leaders who suddenly are going, what the hell's happening with our business model? This is all shifted, this is all changed, nothing is going to be the same again, from a mentality perspective as much as a technological perspective. So short-term, no. Long-term, I wholeheartedly expect there to be a significant trend to increase around this. And it's already started. We started to see a lot more investment activity in this space, and a lot more appetite for global residential type experience applications looking to expand out of their domestic markets. And we've already seen 2 or 3 companies from America, very, very significantly funded businesses, start to say, right, where are the other significant apartment-led markets in capital cities? We need to get there quickly, because our technology is fundamentally the same as it could be anywhere else, and we could just build into different markets. So there's a lot more appetite, knowing that it's going to come very quickly, that these businesses have to adapt. So Yeah, short term, no. Long term, fully expected. And we've already started to see this shift up.
Thank you. It's interesting, also like pre-COVID, that you were kind of seeing things come through, which kind of leads into my next question, which is towards you.
Let me just mention that.
Sorry, absolutely.
And actually, there was this significant, and it was almost too much. There was almost hype. There was too much hype around this market, in the sense of there were probably 2 or 3 very well-funded players out of America. Some of them had already expanded into the UK, and what it had become was there was lots of smaller players trying to get into this market and trying to get funded, and they were sort of flying on the coattails of these other bigger, well-funded apps. And in some cases, we also saw some businesses in this tenant experience basically building to be acquired by. So you've almost got this sort of quasi market where they're just saying, look, you know what? If we can just build in a secondary market, which we know X company has got enough funding to come into that market, we'll just be acquired. We'll be acquired for our user base to win. So that's another interesting dynamic. And I don't think, and that'll be dissimilar in the residential space, which is there's opportunities for entrepreneurial mindsets to say, right, let's have a look at what the people are doing. Let's copy what they're doing and let's build here. So we get the user base and then we'll be acquired. It's the easiest way: buy, build, or invest. And ultimately people are just buying at the minute. It'll become a buyer's market in this space, I'm sure.
Thanks for sharing that. Very interesting. Kind of leading on to kind of the surge you saw pre-corona, and even in the last few years. Harry, have you seen how you build community in your developments? Obviously, you've been at Fizzy for a while. Have you seen that significantly change, like how people want to interact, etc.? Have you seen a shift in that even before COVID?
Yes, I mean, I think it's been changing ever since when this sector really began, which is back in, as I say, it was about 2012. Because back then there was huge amount of reserve in the market. It was still, an Englishman's home is his castle. You should buy if you can. Renting was a bad thing to do, and property market was still, well, it was beginning to grow again after the 2007-2008 crash. But I think that over the period, lots has happened to make it easier to grow a community, mostly through technology. And I think that will continue to get easier as time goes on. I think the mistake that people make is they believe that just because something works in the States or Hong Kong or Singapore or wherever, it's going to work here. And I don't think that is the case. I completely agree with James that the technology that might work somewhere that is very worthwhile to have, and there's an awful lot more that we could automate. But what you can't ever lose sight of is who your community is. Who are your customers? Who are your residents? And they're the ones that create the community. And this is all about the community. And the question was, has it become harder to create a community over the past 5 years? I'd say no, it's become easier, because as build to rent has become an accepted sort of, I don't know, big brother or whatever of the buy to let sector, which was the way to go. You couldn't create a community with buy to let because you owned individual flats. You might own 25, you might own 25,000, but they're still individual flats. And I think the ability to control's the wrong word, but to influence a building of 100 flats, for example, where you run the building, you collect the rent, you run all the amenities, you decide on what amenities to put in, and you run them all, and you use technology to hold that whole thing together. Because after all, what you need is a host for any group, and individually, I think the tenants are looking for a host. They're looking for someone who cares, who's interested, who's going to make their life easier, who they can trust and rely on. And that is becoming more and more accepted. And that's proved with the data that comes from HOMEVIEWS. I mean, we've always run a tenant survey every year since we started. We used to do it ourselves. We now actually outsource it to HOMEVIEWS because that's what they do. But it's really important to understand what our tenants think, what they like, what they don't like. Because if it's something we don't like, we should stop doing it, because if it's costing us money, we're wasting it. And if they don't like it, they're probably not using it. And so, you know, what we hope to achieve is a constantly improving situation, which is a better, happier, more inclusive community. And whether it's, you know, their social life, or it's fixing a leaky tap, or it's picking up some medicine, or whatever it is, we want to be there helping to do it and helping to achieve it. And so to answer your question, I think it's becoming more complicated because there is much more available that we can do. But I wouldn't say it's more difficult, because I think if you're completely in touch with your customer base, it's going to be pretty obvious what's right and what's wrong.
Thank you. So perhaps technology could be a global solution, could be the same technology, but it's essentially what you build into that technology and the strategy behind it that actually makes a difference to whether it works or doesn't work in a certain area, building, development, I suppose. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I think we're in the hospitality business basically, and the easier it is to run the property, the happier everybody is, and you know, then there's your community, and what you want is happy tenants who are going to stay for a long time.
Definitely, happy people make happy places.
Absolutely.
James, I think you did touch on this slightly in your other point, but I don't know if you had anything to add. How you kind of see PropTech supporting, in a wider context, how you see it continuing to support this community uptrend that we've seen and that Harry was just discussing. I don't know if you had anything else to add there. Oh, I think you're muted, James.
Damn, sorry, my fault. And I'm going to say this just purely because I don't think you should all agree on a webinar. So I'm going to fundamentally disagree just on a point of principle with Harry and say that, you know what, the whole point of technology is that it creates the underlying tech that everything is built on. So no, I don't think anybody in the UK can rest on their laurels about having an amazing PropTech solution that can't be replicated or copied, because as Harry said at the end, it's the people, right? It's the people that overlay on top of the tech which make it a success. So any US very successful company that is well funded and has actually solved the problem of some of their tenants, the barrier for them is a legislative barrier. It's not the technological barrier, it's the legislative barrier of, in particular, the UK market, the German market, the Dutch market. They will struggle because of legislation that they haven't got in other markets. That's where the barrier is. If they solve that, if they can deal with that, then technology is in an amazing situation if they can then obviously get the right people. Because as we all know, and I've done this in both private sort of management side as well as housing association management side, it's the people overlay, it's the physical overlay that goes on top of the technology which make a successful solution. And I think that comes to my only point, which is, you know, the rise of PropTech can help solve some of the challenges post-COVID. As Jeremy said earlier on, this is a webinar about what happens after this situation. Technology will underpin the evolution of this sort of discussion that we're having. But the one thing that we cannot forget, and it's been lessened a little bit by what's happened with COVID, is before COVID happened, we had technology for technology's sake. We were using technology to help us in the management of our buildings. And there were certain people who loved to have an app and they wanted to report the problems on an app. We then had the people who were the people who said, no, I really don't want that. I just want to phone and speak to somebody who can solve my problem. I don't care about an app. I don't care about Mrs. Jones who lives 3 doors down. I only care about speaking to people. They've been forced out of that situation. So we've got those people who've actually now seen the benefits of how technology can help in their sector. We've still got what I call the technological underclass, which is the people who will not be able to adapt. You know, we've still got that older generation, the sort of, and I don't just mean in age, but in mentality. So I could swiftly say, you know, the over 75s who are in some of our apartments, not in the Fizzy Living apartments, but in other apartments in secondary cities around the world, who will not be able to adapt to this sort of new engaged technology solution. So I do wholeheartedly believe that, yes, the technology is important, but as in some of the work that I've done a lot with housing associations in the past who run apartment style living, who have to deal with people who simply cannot deal with technology or won't deal with it or can't afford to deal with it, whatever, there is a technological underclass that technology will not be able to solve. And we have to remain with some sense of physical presence as much as a technology presence. We can't help that.
Yeah, and I guess that also ties into what came through in your reviews, Hannah, is it, and whether they've been forced into that happy face at their front desk being not actually face-to-face during COVID, but they still want that point of contact and that that person to interact with. And I guess there are going to be people who are always going to want that to be a face-to-face person.
Well, definitely, and I agree with everything that has been said by Harry and James. I think, as James says, technology is by no means a solution to fix all problems. I think the interesting thing with technology, and actually exactly what Harry and the Fizzy team do, is that they're listening and they're taking a benchmark to actually listen to quantify. And a lot of businesses don't do that. A lot of businesses don't actually take the opportunity to listen to their customers, to listen to their residents. And that in itself is a first step. And what we've seen is that, and actually even speaking to sort of at a government level, they kind of hear murmurings of issues or challenges that might be happening across the property sector, but they have no data to sit behind it to kind of quantify. Sometimes you have to have the tech solution as a first stage, which actually starts to kind of quantify, well, is this actually something that we should be addressing? Is this something that the business should be listening to? But actually it all comes down to the human interaction, the people, the bobs. As we looked at the reviews that I shared at the start, it's all about the friendliness, the welcoming of the team, that I'm being listened to. Yes, they love using the Spike app to report issues, to have a process, but when it comes down to it, we also want to have that, who's at the end of that, who's dealing with the process, who's following up, who's the human interaction, who's going to feed back. So the people element is huge, and we've talked as a sector endlessly about what makes build to rent unique, what's a USP, and community and events being looked after is such a large factor in that, and it's always going to come down to the human touch and the people that you employ. I've spoken to build to rent operators that are sort of starting out in the sector, and they'll often talk about should we have a gym or a swimming pool, and we say, well, what we see on HOMEVIEWS is the most important facility that you've got is the people that you're hiring to actually look after your residents. Whether that's through technology or face-to-face, it's going to be your biggest investment.
Fantastic, thank you, Hannah. That leads quite nicely actually into our next question, which is community the new amenity? Hannah, do you want to start us off there, and then we'll move on to somebody else?
Well, I don't know what everyone's personal experience is, but I've lived in London now for 15 years, and I'm suddenly in a position now. I live on a street. I don't live in a new build development, where we have a WhatsApp group suddenly for my street, and I know my neighbours for the first time, having never met half of them before. And I think that community is increasing for everybody, whether you're in a new build development or not. It's become something that we're all talking about, and I think just looking at the stats that we've seen coming through on HOMEVIEWS, having neighbours who can look after you, look out for you, who show that they're caring. I mean, I loved Jeremy's story of the resident baking a cake. It's these human touches and interactions that build community, and I think it's going to be interesting for build to rent. We've got, as James shared, we've got people who have been using technology and joining virtual events for the first time. Is that going to be the new normal? I don't know. Is that going to stay? But there will be an appetite for it. There will also be a lot of people who are still nervous, once the communal facilities start getting opened up again at some point. There'll be people who will be nervous about attending those kind of events. They're not going to be ready just to go back to the, what the events might have been in February. So I think community is key. How build to rent developments and operators are going to offer community is the new challenge. But in terms of how important it is, I think it's more important than ever.
Thank you, Hannah. And Harry, what are your views around the same questions as community as the new amenity?
Well, as I think I said, I think community was always there as an amenity. It was just being used differently as time has gone on. I think that, I mean, we certainly see a huge amount of tenant generated events, which that's I suppose is community in action. There was a picnic organised by the tenants at our Hayes development last week, for example. You know, it's going back to the old days of I've got to go out and do something. Who's going to look after the dog for an hour? Well, you're in a building with, you know, a couple of hundred other people. Probably 50 of them would love to have your dog for an hour, as long as it's not longer than an hour. But you know, it's all of that is putting people back in touch, and it's, you know, that's nothing to do with technology. Technology makes it easier to do it, but it's the people. It's getting people talking to each other. And all I can say is all of the sort of things that we do now, that all of the sort of clubs that we see starting, the cake thing. I mean, I had a lovely thing at one of our buildings. One of the tenants was on MasterChef in Portugal. He's a Portuguese guy, and they used to have tenant parties once every couple of months. He used to do all the cooking. You know, obviously, it was a treat. It was delight. I used to go. Never fed so well. But all of these things that then they steamroller into something else, and then all of a sudden you've got a really happy group of people, and you might have someone who's, you know, put together an opera group, or someone's got a theatre group, or someone's got a cinema group, or, you know, it's all doable. And I think that is what this is all about. And as I say, the technology can be there to hold it together, but actually it is the people, it's the faces who make it work and keep it going.
Thank you, Harry. So pretty linked to what we've been saying there, really, but kind of if we think about moving beyond COVID, which might be tricky to think about right now, but hopefully we will get there, is there a wider point to creating these local communities, which I think we have all touched on, but so obviously it's helped, it's clear that it's helped a lot of people through this really tough time, and it's made them feel part of a community, even though maybe physically you can't go shake your neighbour's hand, but community has still existed. And I would like to ask if we think that we can kind of go beyond that, and if this community, by creating these super localised communities, if that can kind of help the wider subjects like the loneliness epidemic in and out of cities, really. We sometimes see people, you know, moving outside of the big cities to find more community, to find more localised living. Do we think by creating that, it's going to help this kind of loneliness epidemic that we've seen? And should developers, operators, investors, etc., is that their responsibility to make sure that they are looked after and that their residents don't feel lonely? Jeremy, if we could start with your view on that, and then we'll see if Harry has anything to add too.
Absolutely. I think it's really important, as everybody said, that our software is a conduit, and it is a conduit to the people that live within the developments. We manage the traffic that goes through that. We just facilitate that traffic, which is really important. And I understand exactly what James is saying about the big American people and the big players from overseas. I think I mentioned earlier on my background is video games, and the reference to that is that 90% of software built is built from the back end, not the front end. And what I mean about the front end, I'm talking about consumers. It's about our software is consumer driven. It's how does our software feel? What are the residents' requests? How does it work? Rather than from an operator's perspective, which is all about reporting and admins, and we have all of that kind of boring stuff. How does it all look with the resident? So coming out of this, any operator that doesn't have a community piece of software of some description, there's one question that they all need to ask themselves is, how did we manage lockdown? What happened in those circumstances? How was our building? What happened? What was good? What was negative? What can we do better? Because what we all have to learn through this experience is what can be done better. Obviously, my opinion is that having a social app like ourselves, which also does all the facilities management stuff, is the right way to go, obviously. But it does show that we know going into this there was loneliness, there was suicides in the teenage. It's never been higher. You know, all of that was discussed very explicitly going into this, and it hasn't gone away. So we're going to come out of it. It's still there. So developments, you know, I firmly believe that this rests with the landlord, the investors, and of these schemes and the developers. And if you speak to them, which we have spoken to most of them, they all agree. It's just getting that balance. So yes, you know, is it their responsibility? I think it's the responsibility to their community, their residents, to create as good a place and as best an environment as they possibly can.
Fantastic. Harry, did you have anything to add around the same subject?
Yeah, as far as, you know, relieving the loneliness epidemic, definitely that's happened. And again, you read the reviews and it's blindingly obvious that has been happening. But responsibility, I mean, that's a big word, responsibility. You know, I'm responsible to my investors to make sure that the flats are full and people are paying rent and they get their dividend. That's a responsibility. But I'd be bonkers if I didn't do everything in my power to make sure my tenants were all a happy bunch of people, and we were trying to do things which were beating the market, or at least we're riding the crest of the wave, because that's obvious as well. But I'm not sure it's my responsibility. That's me as a person. It's, you know, I care about my tenants and in the way I care about my family. You know, it's about what we do and how we do it. And so I just think responsibility is the wrong word, but I'd be mad if I didn't do it.
Kirsty, could I just make a quick point here a second? And I'm going to share a link in the Q&A. I think the Q&A is probably the best place for the to share it with participants. I'm just going to share an article that I was sent probably about a week or so ago, just because it's something that underlines what we're trying to do at the minute within UNISU, which is to create this social layer. And both, you know, Harry and Jeremy are bang on, which is this social layer is becoming an absolute prerequisite now of all technology solutions that are coming in. And we're talking here about this sort of post-COVID era. And this is just talking about the sort of the social media space, which is from 2002 to 2012, there was this golden age of the Facebooks, the LinkedIns, the Twitters, the Instagrams, and so on and so forth. And then what happened is, for sort of the last 6 years or so, there was this ice age where nobody, you know, they fulfilled everything that we ever needed about our social networks. You know, we could liaise with our friends and we could post updates and photos and videos and all this sort of stuff. And they're basically saying that this social layer was completely put out to any form of innovation in the last 6 years. It wasn't there, with one exception, which was TikTok. So TikTok blew everything away from China over to the West, and it sort of changed things. And what this article, and I'll share it because it's a really particularly interesting article around this next age of the social layer that is underpinning everything, is that we've now got this sudden innovation forced by COVID that we want to create new forms of social layers. And a lot of that is around things that we're talking about within these apps, but also a lot of this is around things like the video calls, the Zoom chats that we're all having. People are realizing it is actually a very adequate way of dealing with conversations and quick snapshots. And there's a lot of investment at the minute around this sort of new social layer. So we're at a perfect time to start taking advantage of this. And I'll post this link because it is a particularly interesting article for anyone interested in it.
Great, thank you for that, James. I look forward to reading all that. My final questions, I think we've everybody has answered, which was kind of why, as operators, should we invest in community and why not leave it to the residents? I think we've probably. I think I've heard some views on that already, but Hannah, I know you haven't spoken on the subject, so if you have anything to add, and then if anybody does after that as well, just feel free to chip in.
I think from a HOMEVIEWS perspective, we consistently see reviews talking about making friends and connectivity within buildings and actually why people want to stay. So there's an obvious, you know, as Harry says, it's sort of, you know, building community, making sure your tenants are happy is obvious, if people have made friends. I mean, there's lots of data to say that if you've made friends within your building, how much likely it is that you're going to stay for longer and renew your tenancy. And we see that in reviews. My actual favourite review of all time is from Fizzy Canning Town, which was, I think, left just over a year ago, by a resident who actually fell in love with another resident in the building, and they now share a flat together, and Fizzy is their home, and he wrote passionately about how Fizzy enabled him to fall in love. So there's definitely some benefits for community in different ways, but it makes sense to keep your residents happy, to make friends, and people will stay longer. If you've got your friends in the building, then you're kind of happier people, happier tenants who want to live there longer.
Harry, that sounds like real added value to me. If they're not already in your marketing campaigns, they need to be.
Oh no, I wanted to start a Fizzy dating app, but I got turned down on that by my colleagues.
I think it's a fantastic idea.
I'll leave that for Jeremy to add it on.
So fantastic. If does anybody have any final things to add? If not, we will go to some. I think we've got about 10 minutes to go through some questions from the audience, which Dave is kindly going to go through for us, unless anybody else has anything to add. Thank you.
So the two questions come in from the audience. Three now. And I've got lots myself. I'd love to talk about alienation and the impact of housing on that and design. But the two questions, let's go first to the second question here. As the sector settles itself, will community be self-curating, going offline from the operator tech? You hinted at some of that, but James, what's your view on that from a tech perspective? Is it going to be self-regulating, or is there a new generation of tech that's going to come along?
Sorry, is this the question from the anonymous attendee about?
Yes.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because actually there is a risk of, if you're not a large enough company, that your app, if you are really only in one or two buildings, just becomes redundant, in the sense of you've settled these new communities offline. These wonderful cake baking sort of clubs and groups. It just means that people then get the actual offline connection. They don't need the app in the first place. But certainly, if you take Harry's multiple developments, there are massive opportunities there in terms of that cross-pollination around different developments and people coming together. And you've seen that again very much in the commercial space with companies like WeWork, before obviously it all went completely wrong, where their success around some of their tenant engagement was around different office blocks coming together and pivoting around that side. So there is a risk in smaller operators, but I think if the larger operators are clever, there's massive opportunities for them there.
I think that's right. In the sense that the existential challenge of build to rent is, can we create a build to rent brand which creates a community that identifies with that product?
Yeah, definitely. And that's absolutely pivotal, Dave. It's not going to go anywhere if it's not. There needs to be one or two very strong brands out there which control it. And equally, when you're looking at it from a business perspective, if you're looking for investment, you're not going to get the investment unless you can satisfy this brand. What is the brand that you've got? And second, and that's where WeWork did so well. Arguably they created the brand, but they also created value in that cross-pollination of their tenants. The value came from the tenants and the actual the business that we've done between tenants, and WeWork were taking all the money off of that. So if we can create that equivalent within the build to rent space, then there's absolute potential in there for sure. There's a marketplace offering here like you wouldn't believe.
Absolutely. Perhaps move on to the third question there. And Harry, if I can ask you this one, from your observations of your residents, do you think those people who are more introvert or not so socially confident are feeling even more excluded these days, either through the trend of socialization through technology, or these things that are, in the case of the naturally more outgoing? How do you reach out to these people?
It's a very good question. I don't think they are more excluded. I think that there are some people who, for whatever reason, don't like technology, don't want to rely on technology, and want to speak to somebody. And I completely respect that. And when we have those people in our buildings and we say to them, you know, if something breaks, stick it on the app, and they just say, oh, come down and have a chat with you about it. And we know they're going to. And 99% of the people, 90% of the people will do it on the app. But if that 10% want to come and have a chat, that's why we have a Bob there. So we're fine with it.
Yeah, and I think James picked up on the point about saying there is a digital underclass in society that we have to cater for. I'll go on to the final question. I'll go on to the question of, do you think post-COVID-19 communal spaces will move more towards working spaces rather than cinema, games, rooms, etc., as people set to be more working from home? Hannah, I wonder whether you've seen any evidence of that in the sort of feedback you get from people.
I think the feedback that we've seen is we've seen a lot of people actually talking about how set up they are for home working. A lot of positive comments about Wi-Fi and connectivity. We've also had lots of pictures shared of people showing their space and if they've got enough space in their flat to accommodate working from home. I know from speaking to different operators that some have been able to be quite innovative at this time. So a really nice example is Duet, part of the More brand up in Manchester. They actually, because they were in the lease up phase, they had quite a few empty flats, and they were able to actually give some tenants who had children in their flat keys to an empty flat, so they could go in there and work and have some peace and quiet. I think there's going to be, I think it's obvious to us all, there's going to be a big increase in demand for home working. And I've certainly heard from different operators who are looking at their investment portfolio and what they're looking at in terms of new acquisitions for buildings. Home working spaces, co-working spaces in the buildings is gone right to the top of the priority list. So I think it will be interesting to see what residents want, and I think it's the resident engagement, isn't it? There's got to be a change in the space, and engage your residents about whether or not they want that change. But I think we're still at a point in time where it's hard to know how easily these older spaces are going to be reopened for how they were previously used. And I think there's still going to be a desire for some people for face-to-face community events. Time will tell still, I think, at this point.
Thanks, Hannah. Harry, in terms of thinking about your future buildings, are you focusing on more working spaces rather than the traditional amenities?
Yep. Our last three buildings have got, or most recent three buildings, have got co-worker spaces in the ground floor, which is all combined with the Bob space, and they are proving to be very popular. We don't tend to go for cinemas and gyms and that sort of thing, because all of our buildings are in town centres next door to cinemas and gyms and restaurants and pubs and things. So it is things like the working space which are becoming more and more popular. But we'll keep evolving. And if someone comes up with some brilliant idea that everyone loves, our next building might have that. I don't know what it is yet, but we'll be listening.
Okay. We're almost out of time. It's 10:57. I'm keen to get things finished on time. Perhaps I could just pass over to you, Jeremy. The final question: what's the biggest positive that you've seen come out of COVID-19 that can improve your business for the future?
Well, I think everybody said it, and that is the spirit that is being shown amongst all of the residents, from the reviews coming from Hannah to what we've seen through Fizzy and across all our clients, is that there is this demand, and yes, people will always want to speak to somebody. We're not trying to replace that person. As I said, we are this conduit that pulls all this together. So for me, it's a cliche, but I think what people are prepared to do for their fellow neighbours can even surprise the old cynics that we all have become. And I've seen some lovely things, and that is heartwarming across all our developments, across all our clients, unilaterally, that people are genuinely very, very caring and want to share in that community. So for me, that is a very positive step moving forward. The key is, what the whole point of this webinar is, that we don't lose sight of that when we come out of it and everybody goes crazy again.
Good. Right, it's at 10:59. I think we'll wrap up there. Unless anybody's got any final burning points they want to make. No, surprised me. Right, but I'd like to echo that there's been an absolutely great debate, really great discussion on community, and touched on a whole series of things. I mean, I would have loved to have, we've had some questions in we haven't answered. I'd love to have put in lots of my own questions, going back to my days as a social scientist and asking about alienation and all that sort of stuff. And then...
That's somebody who wants the final word there, Dave.
Yeah, they do indeed, but they're not going to get it. Apart from me. Anyway, let's say thank you to Jeremy, to Harry, to Hannah, to James, to Kirsty, and to Spike Global for putting on a really interesting event. Our next event then for the UKAA is another webinar on Thursday on nutrition and exercise, and the way that's changed and will develop during COVID-19, post-COVID-19, and that's by Motivate. And then we've got 3 tech webinars over the next few weeks, which I hope you'll join us for, as well as for those of you who are members who can join us on our suppliers forum, our operators forum, our senior leaders forum, and our borrowers and lenders forum. It's 11 o'clock. I'll say goodbye and thank you once again for joining us. Thank you to all the panelists, and thank you for a fascinating debate. It's been great and really interesting. So au revoir. See you soon. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.